1 Corinthians 13. We started last week in the descriptions, love is patient, love is kind. We moved to verse 6 this week. That was verse 4. In verse 6 it says, love doesn't rejoice in wrong, but rejoices in the truth. And this sets up this principle that is involved in rich relationships as God intends them. Principle number 3 is this: communicate from the heart. Love always speaks the truth. Communicate from the heart. Love always speaks the truth. We can't have deep relationships with people if truth isn't a priority in there, is it? It just won't work if truth is not a priority in there. Now, often that's a joyful thing. Who doesn't like to tell somebody the truth if it's a positive? You know, oh, you look good today, or, you know, you're really progressing in that, and that's the truth, and it can be encouraging for them and makes you feel good in just sharing. But what if the truth is not such a positive thing, just a necessary thing? It's something necessary that needs to be shared. Then this whole love relationship starts getting a little harder, doesn't it? It gets to be somewhat more challenging in sharing a not so positive truth. Now, we said the principle is love always tells the truth, but let's look at this in perspective. That doesn't mean, okay, the pastor said it, I can recklessly go out there and say whatever I want to anyone as long as it's the truth. You know, this is the truth. You might not want to hear it. Or even in churches sometimes that can happen. You know, those are code words. You ever notice that in churches sometimes? If somebody starts with, now I'm telling you this in love, you know, that's a code word. You're about to get nailed with something, right? But the truth is, we're supposed to be sharing the truth. In this framework, love is patient, love is kind. So this truth, even as it is spoken, is spoken out of patience and kindness. Too often, truth can be used like bullets. It's a weapon. We aim with the truth instead of aiming for the truth. So, and you know that when you use truth like bullets, it doesn't turn out well. It doesn't turn out well. So the big question becomes then, how can you be sure when you're going to share a hard truth that you're really doing it in godly love? Wow, because we can play tricks with our own mind, can't we? We can rationalize things and say, well, this is really, you know, I'm saying this in love, and the truth is that maybe it's a pious payback. You know, that person said something, so now you get to say something back. Sometimes we speak out of insecurity. There's a lot of reasons we can fool ourselves into thinking we're saying it in love, quote unquote, and it's really not the case. Well, where can we go to, okay, give me a biblical illustration. Show me something from Scripture that shows how this is done. And it's really not all that hard to find a place. As a matter of fact, we can stay right in with Corinthians. You know, right in the letters in Corinthians. Paul, the Apostle Paul, is writing to the Corinthian church. And, you know, this is a great place to look, because if you think churches are bad today, you know, here is this church where they were getting drunk at communion. Well, that hasn't happened here for a while, right? They were having affairs with mother-in-laws, you know, to boot. I mean, there was some bad stuff going on there, but that wasn't even the worst of it. You know, I could ask you, as in here, when we're in a larger crowd, usually, you know, it can't be too rhetorical, but even just think to yourself, what is the worst thing that can happen in a church fellowship? And in the first small group that we had up here, they had some great answers. But let me just throw this out. Everything comes down to this. Probably the worst thing that can happen in a church fellowship is when a group forms who are unteachable and rebellious. You know, if you have even the best leadership in the world and the best pastor in the world, if people feel they know better and they know more, then nothing can be taught, nothing can be changed in that church. Now, fortunately, that's not where we are. I've seen it, maybe you have too, in a number of churches, and it's not pretty. This is what Paul was going through. Paul was taking care of a lot of different churches, and so he couldn't be physically present in every one of them. So the Corinthian church had this group of people that when Paul wasn't there, they were, well, like we say, talking trash. They were talking him down. They knew more than Paul, and they were correcting this and that. You can imagine, here he is, he can't, it's not even the fact that he can't defend himself, is that a lot of wrong stuff ends up getting said to these people, and now he has to clean up the mess or try to clean up the mess. So the letters to the church in Corinth are all about this stuff. Isn't it interesting? This really tough church to control, to try and teach, is where we find the greatest illustration of love and the greatest description. So Paul is writing to this church, and he's got to tell them some hard truths. You know what? When somebody runs off with their mother-in-law, you got to say something. You know, when people are getting drunk at communion, be a little hard here. Maybe that's why we have to use grape juice. I don't know. But you got to say something. So Paul has to talk, but look at how he approaches these people. The letters are really consolidated in snippets, so we can kind of look at it in snippets. What we call 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 3. Here's how the spirit in which he's addressing these difficult people. And I wrote this very thing to you, lest when I come, I should have sorrow over those for whom I ought to have joy. Having confidence in you, all that my joy is the joy of you all. For out of much affliction and anguish of heart, I wrote to you with many tears, not that you should be grieved, but that you might know the love which I have so abundantly for you. Wow. Hard to believe that's to such a harsh church. Here's where we're going with this, is Paul is about to visit these people, but before he ever visits and says anything, he sends a letter. And before he sends a letter, he spends a whole lot of time thinking about what's going in the letter that's going to set up what he says when he gets there on purpose. So there's a lot of stuff going on before the hard truth gets addressed. Okay, what does that mean for us? Well, it means we can borrow from Paul some principles here, some filters, if you will, questions we can take to ourselves before we have to share a hard truth of some kind. What kind of questions? Well, let me just pull a couple from these letters for you. The first one is, what is my motive? What is my motive? And you honestly ask yourself, before you get brutally honest with someone else, maybe start with getting brutally honest with yourself. What is God revealing to your heart? If you stop and you spend some time with him, what's he really revealing of your heart? You know, there's so many things that cannot be godly love. It could be, I just want the last word. It could be, I'm insecure in my position, so I got to make sure this person gets the way I see it. It's got to be, it might be pious payback, like we said, that my goodness, this person, they zinged you once, now's your chance to get back at them, and you can do it in love. There's a lot of reasons that can be the wrong reasons. So the first question is, what's my motive? Why do I even have to say this thing I'm saying? Well, this will help us in the first question. And the second, will sharing this truth help? Will sharing this truth help? Think of how God is truth. God knows everything about you. He knows everything about me. Imagine if God simply shared every truth about you with you all at once. Every flaw, every wrong, everything that sent him to the cross. We'd all go out and hang ourselves, wouldn't we? It wouldn't be helpful to know everything at once. We're not ready for it. You mature into some of these things. God knows that when he shares something, it's to help and not hurt. Now, it might be a painful truth, but the outcome won't be hurtful. The outcome won't be harmful. Will it help and not hurt? We try and stay with the more literal translations, but sometimes a little bit of paraphrasing helps out. And this is from the Living Bible translation, 2 Corinthians 12:19. Once again, Paul speaking. I tell you, with God listening as I say it, that I have said this to help you, dear friends, to build you up spiritually and not to help myself. To build you up, but not to help myself. And this is the man who's under attack that's unwarranted. And he said, it's not about defending myself. I'm telling you this because if you don't get these facts right, it's going to hurt you. So he had to share a difficult truth, but it was going to be something that would help and not hurt. Have I earned the right? Have I earned the right? I think everybody's heard that little saying by now that I'm not sure who first coined it, but people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. You probably have heard that somewhere. That idea of earning the right, remember when we looked at patience and kindness, there was empathy. A lot of things went into that. You walked in that person's shoes a little bit. You were able to look through their eyes at their situation. Even yourself, think, have you ever had somebody come up to you and say, the trouble with you is, and they launch it, and they don't even know you. They don't know the first thing about you. How does that make you feel? They don't have anything worth sharing. They don't even know where I'm coming from. But maybe that could be us. Before we say anything, have we earned the right? Are we invested in that person in any way? Now, every relationship can't be deep, so maybe we better be a little careful with how we share the truth as far as when it gets personal. Paul was invested with these people. He knew the Corinthian church, and they knew him. There was time invested there, so when he spoke, he knew where they were coming from. He walked in their shoes a little bit. He understood where they were coming, so his words carried merit. You and I, have we at least spent some time hearing before we ever said anything? And this idea fits across the spectrum. Just because even somebody could be your child or your parent doesn't necessarily mean they earn the right in if they've been estranged. If they know nothing about you or you know nothing about them, how can you turn around and say, well, I got to tell you something hard about yourself? How do you know? Yes, you may be a sibling or something, but you don't even know where I am in life now. We have to earn the right before we can go on and say something. And in the same way, even in church family. That's a whole thing as we talk about even getting together in groups and doing different things. Part of that is invested in each other's lives, to know each other enough to be able to share it all in patience and in kindness. Now, that's talking preparation of a relationship in that, but there's preparation goes into telling that truth as well. Did you notice how Paul started his letter? When we looked at the addressing there in 2 Corinthians, it said in anguish and in tears. He spent a lot of time just formulating the letter. And the letter was just the first wave of how he was communicating with them at all. Spending time. Ever shoot from the hip? Wish you didn't? Reacted a little too quickly on something? Amazing how that can go on. It's amazing, too, on how things pair up in our character traits. For instance, pride and anger tend to go together. If you notice that, pride and anger go together. You said, what? You talking to me? How dare you say that? Don't you know who I am? Don't you know how right I am and how wrong you are? Pride and anger tend to go together. In the same way, you know what else goes together is calmness and humility. Calmness and humility. When we're angry and we shoot from the hip, it usually doesn't end well. Even when you're right, you're not right. You're sabotaging the relationship and your obedience to God both. Even when you're right, you're not right. But calmness and humility go together. That's why God says, be still and know I am God. Be still, know I am God. In calmness, God might say, remember when I had to forgive you for this or that? Remember when you did this or that wrong? Calmness, humility is not beating yourself up. Humility is just getting the perspective of who you really are. And generally, in most cases, when we get the perspective, we may not be all that right, and that person maybe is not all that wrong. Or maybe in this time before you react from the hip, maybe there was a misunderstanding and you're about to shoot off on something that wasn't even meant. But calmness and humility, the state of which you are in yourself, when you go to convey this truth. If you're in the wrong state yourself, you haven't prepared yourself, even when you're right, you could be wrong. Even when you're right, you could be wrong. Preparation involves understanding the other person's perspective, as in who you are talking to. For instance, men talking to women in a marriage even, take that. Women use different mental pictures than men do. Now, I would challenge any man to try this. Is next time you want to extol your wonderful marriage with your wife, say, our marriage together is like a 4x4 with a big Hemi engine. And I almost guarantee you, she will not melt in your arms. That's not the way you would talk across gender. Same thing even in teaching the kids. There's youth church going on out there, and there's all kinds of young folks in there. And young people think in terms of very literal. So if you go in there and you may have this wonderful illustration that's profound, and wow, it really means something to you, don't be surprised if you end up with blank stares. Because kids just don't think in abstract terms. They're not there yet. They think in literal terms. The point is this: when you're talking to someone and you're sharing, you share to their perspective, to where they are. That's what love does. Why are you sharing that truth at all? Well, if it's to get something across you want them to understand, then you speak from their point of view, things that will resonate with them. Especially if we're like Paul and, hey, this is a truth that it's hurting you not knowing this. Then you share from their perspective. You might use some great illustration that really fits for you, but not for them. We share from their standpoint. Preparation means you know where you're coming from with them. Communicating at the best time. Communicating at the best time. We talked about that a little bit in the first services. When are good times, when are bad times? And one person chimed in and said, well, when you're not in public. Well, yeah, how would that be? I mean, take this time. Say I knew, Carol, here's something you really got to straighten out. This is a personal problem in your life. And I stand by, oh, Carol, everybody else, Carol's probably not going to be too happy. Probably won't even accept, she'll be so hurt from the way it was shared. There are times to share and times not. For me, I had to kind of learn the hard way too, is, fellowship time, it's fine. We are all together and somebody will share something and it's a big concern or a big issue, and I'm tempted to try and respond. They've already, Ron's back there, already started the timer on the service coming, and I've got, a few minutes, and that's just long enough to really botch it up. But a few minutes would be plenty of time to say, let's talk at a better time. And you set a time when you can really get together and alone or whatever. So there's always a good time. When are other bad times? You're both tired and exhausted. Bad time to share. Even maybe when you're both hungry. There's a lot of times, maybe now is not the right time. The truth needs to be shared. It needs to be in a timely manner, but pick your time well. Pick your time well. Is this a good time? Prepare that way. Be prepared in your mind to take a risk. There's not any truth, I think, positive or negative. Once you are communicating with another human being, there's always the risk of being misunderstood. There's always the risk that you'll take that big old number 12 shoe of yours and stick it right in your mouth. We do that. There's all kinds of things, even positive. I think I stole a story from you, Steve, today. I was mentioning, and so if I botch this, you just correct it later. Steve talking at work that one of his fellows at work said, lady in the office, boy, you look nice today. And if I recall, the thing was sexual harassment. That's one time. Next time I'm, going to the boss. But so, even positive things. So how much more when it's a hard truth? When it's a hard truth, you need to share it. You need to share it in love. Okay, fine. But be ready that it's a risky business. It is. Even at the best of times, it's a risky business. Well, that brings us to another question, because so far here I am. I said, look at all the effort that goes into telling the truth, all these filters and questions and preparation. And then even after that, you say there's still a big risk. Then why do it at all? Why do it at all? Well, this may sound a little strange, but the first reason isn't for them. The first reason isn't for you. The first reason isn't to clear the air. The first reason isn't even to deepen the relationship, although all these things happen. The first reason is obedience to God. That if we're in a situation where God has laid on our heart to tell the truth, and we need to bring it up, whether it's something that'll be exciting to do or whether it's going to be kind of a tough go, it's obedience to God. If you know you should tell somebody something, and you should do it in love, and you should do it in obedience, and you should do it in kindness and patience, where all that's understood. But if you know you're supposed to and you don't, then you're fighting with God on this. You're out of alignment with God himself. So the first reason is to keep right with God. Then we get into other reasons that are involved in here. Paul again, now not to the Corinthians, but talking to the Ephesian church, Ephesians 4:15, he says, speaking the truth. So it's right on topic, right? Speaking the truth in love, we may grow up in all things into him who is the head, Christ. We speak in truth in love to grow up. Man, we live in a culture today where we're all growing older, whether we like that or not, but not all of us are growing up. There's a lot of adult children in our culture today. One of the reasons is that we have stepped back from learning how, practicing, accepting, receiving, interacting by speaking the truth in love. The truth in godly love. How does that work? Well, you can see in a family in that, but here we are, this is a spiritual family. As we are in membership here, or we're regulars to this place, we are church family. I want to give you scenarios, two actually. We'll call it the tale of two churches. Imagine the first church, friendly church. You cannot get in the door without somebody shaking your hand or hugging you or something. Friendly church. But the top priority in love is not to offend anyone. So even if something needs to be said, it's not said. It's the type of place that if you came in with food in the middle of your teeth, you know, that type of thing, that nobody would tell you because they wouldn't want to offend you. But they'll shake your hand and they'll try and pretend that food isn't in your teeth. So here you are in a place where everyone will shake your hand, but no one has your back. Shallow relationships, not a lot of growth or depth going on. Imagine a second church. Imagine that, yeah, they're friendly enough, but you know what? You can count on people telling you the truth. And when you come in, and if you do have food in your teeth, then somebody somewhere along the way will nicely tell you. Where if it's something even more serious, you may not want to hear it, but if it's said, you know what, you really do need to hear it. You do need to hear it. So people, yeah, they'll shake your hand, but what you can count on is they have your back. They've invested the time. You know, let's say they're really fanatical people, and they even have midweek meetings. Some of them are even in their homes, just, you know, fanatical going on. But in all of this fanaticalness, they do get to know each other enough where they can speak into each other's lives. So yeah, friendly enough, but that's not the big thing. Belonging there, you feel like someone really does have your back. Which kind of fellowship do you rather be in? It's kind of interesting. There are a lot of people who choose the first. Maybe you've heard this yourself, well, I go to, and we're not going to poo-poo on big churches or little churches, but I go to this great big church so I can get lost in a crowd and nobody really knows me. In other words, I'm in there so nobody knows me, no deep relationships. In effect, that's saying I want to be somewhere where we don't grow in love. where no one has my back. They don't even know me, and that's the way I like it. Okay, well, all the power. But if we're talking a spiritual place, a place where you experience God, which comes through others as well, it needs to be a place where you have to risk being known, and then you may have to risk sharing some of your knowledge with the person, as in every now and then there might be a truth that is kind of painful, but it's necessary. But we have each other's backs. Which one would you rather belong to? Here's the thing, if you want to be in the God church, it is the one where we share in love. However, that means it's got to start somewhere. It's got to start somewhere. Where's the priority for you? Are you the type of person who will be investing, be patient, be kind, but yet willing to share the truth? It's got to start with someone. So would it start with you? Would it start with me? Is it a priority that we will take onto ourselves? Because I'll leave it at this. If it's not a deliberate decision, it just doesn't happen. It's got to be a deliberate decision.